Every life story begins long before we can remember, long before language, long before we learn how to present ourselves to the world. It begins in a moment so quiet, so mysterious, that most people never question it at all. Yet here is the unsettling idea that your entire emotional life may have been shaped before you ever took your first breath. And here comes the strange question almost no one ever asks. What if you arrived in this world already carrying a wound that was not created by experience, but by existence itself? Carl Jung believed that every human being enters life with an original wound, a silent imprint formed at the threshold between the unconscious and the physical world. It is not a flaw and not a punishment. It is the first moment your psyche encountered limitation, the moment your infinite inner world collided with the reality of being human. Something inside you was unable to express itself fully. A part of the self that wanted to breathe, speak, and be seen was quietly tucked into the shadow, the hidden chamber of the psyche where you place everything that feels unsafe, unaccepted, or misunderstood. This happens long before childhood roles, before family expectations, before school teaches you what is acceptable and what must be hidden. The shadow does not form from trauma alone. It forms from the simple truth that no human being arrives with complete permission to be everything they naturally are. The moment you entered this world, you began learning which parts of you were welcomed and which parts were too intense, too quiet, too sensitive, too bold, too emotional, or too alive to fit the environment around you. Your birth month, in this context, is not an astrological label. It is a symbolic timestamp, the psychological blueprint of the first energetic environment you emerged into. Jung taught that the psyche is deeply symbolic, shaped by seasons, rhythms, and collective patterns. The moment you were born carries the imprint of an emotional climate. It sets the tone for how you instinctively approach the world and how the world first approaches you. It whispers something about what part of you was encouraged to grow and what part of you instinctively withdrew. Think about this for a moment. Each season has its own emotional signature. Each cultural moment carries a collective mood. Each period of the year shapes how families behave, how communities respond, and how energy flows around you. Your birth month represents the very first psychological mirror life held up to your soul. It shaped the earliest version of your identity, not by logic, but by atmosphere. In that atmosphere, certain qualities within you rose naturally, while others quietly folded themselves away into the shadow, waiting for the day you would become conscious enough to reclaim them. This original wound is not a scar. It is an unopened doorway. It is the part of you that has been whispering through your insecurities, your patterns, your emotional triggers, and your deepest longings. It explains why certain situations feel unbearably familiar, why certain fears return no matter how far you travel, and why certain strengths feel strangely natural, as if they were planted in you from the beginning. By the end of this journey, one question begins to echo within you, not as fear, but as invitation. What wound was I born with, and what part of myself is waiting to come back home? Have you ever stopped to ask yourself why certain parts of you still feel like they're hiding, even as an adult? Why, in moments of conflict or connection, do you sometimes hear a voice inside that you silence before anyone else can? That voice may sound irrational, dramatic, too emotional, too needy, too angry, or even too powerful to be accepted. And so, you've learned to swallow it, to perform strength, to act agreeably, to become who others expect you to be. But beneath that silence lives a truth too raw to be buried forever. Most people do not spend their lives chasing their dreams. They spend their lives avoiding their shadow. They avoid the part of themselves that once made them feel unsafe, unloved, or too much. And this avoidance doesn't begin in adulthood. It begins in childhood, in the quiet ways we are conditioned to survive. Maybe you were the child who always smiled, even when you were hurting, because being easy to love felt safer than being honest. Maybe you learned that your role was to fix things, stay silent, and keep the peace. Or perhaps you were the strong one, the achiever, the one who had to rise above your pain before anyone even noticed it existed. And yet, something inside you still breaks in private. You overreact to small comments and wonder why. You sabotage good relationships, then blame yourself. You put everyone else first, then feel resentful that no one sees you. You show up as confident but secretly feel like an imposter. This is the cost of abandoning your emotional truth. This is the wound the world never sees, the one buried behind your most acceptable traits. Carl Jung called this the shadow, the unconscious part of the psyche, where we exile all the emotions, desires, and instincts we believe are unacceptable. But here is what makes it even more tragic. The shadow doesn't form because you're broken. It forms because you adapted. It is a survival strategy, not a flaw. When your environment couldn't hold the fullness of who you were, your psyche split itself in two. The version you thought was lovable and the version you had to hide. And the longer this split continues, the more haunted you become by the parts of yourself you've disowned. Your shadow might be the sadness you were never allowed to show, the anger you were punished for, the hunger for love that made you feel weak, the confidence that made others uncomfortable, the sexuality that was shamed, the boundaries you were never taught to hold. Over time, what you bury becomes what controls you. Not consciously, but through emotional patterns, triggers, defensiveness, anxiety, and even unexplained guilt. You find yourself reacting with intensity and then blaming yourself for being too sensitive or too emotional, never realizing that this reaction is the cry of a self that has been caged for far too long. The saddest part is this: most people die loyal to the mask they built to survive. They spend decades perfecting the performance while quietly wondering why nothing ever feels whole. But wholeness doesn't come from being good. It comes from being real. And the more you avoid your shadow, the more you give it power. What you suppress doesn't disappear. It waits. So here's the question that might change everything. What if the part of yourself you've feared the most is the very part you've needed all along? Have you ever felt like you were born into a role, a silent expectation that shaped who you had to become long before you understood who you truly were? Like some invisible script was already waiting for the day you took your first breath? What if that script wasn't just written by your parents or society, but by the very month you were born into? Its symbolism, its collective mood, its archetypal energy? According to Carl Jung's philosophy, the unconscious is not only personal, but collective, and time itself carries meaning. Your birth month carries more than a date on a calendar. It carries a psychological season, a symbolic imprint that influences how you love, how you cope, and which parts of you were silently told to hide in order to belong. Before you spoke a word, the weather of the world around your birth began shaping your emotional posture, what you would suppress and what you would exaggerate just to survive. What if the timing of your arrival shaped the very mask you wear today? Think about it. People born in the early months, January and February, often carry an unconscious weight of responsibility. They feel the pressure to be strong, reliable, and wise beyond their years, even when inside they're desperate to be held. Their emotional landscape is often frozen in stoicism, mirroring the winter silence they were born into. Those born mid-year, May, June, tend to be the peacekeepers, the harmonizers. They adapt quickly, mediate conflict, and anticipate others' needs, often at the cost of silencing their own. The warmth of their season brings connection, but that warmth is sometimes performed, and those born near the year's end, October, November, often carry the archetype of the visionary or the outsider. They feel everything deeply, question everything profoundly, and often sense that they don't quite belong to the world they were given. Their season of darkness brings a kind of psychic depth, but also a loneliness they cannot explain. You might ask, is this astrology? Not quite. Jung believed in archetypal energy, not in deterministic fate. He saw that we are born into cultural and psychological fields of meaning. The month of your birth carries a collective mood, the symbols, rhythms, and energies that were in the air as your unconscious mind began forming. These imprints are not chains, but they do create patterns, and within those patterns, something sacred happens. One part of you becomes your armor, and another part becomes your shadow. Maybe you've spent your life achieving and producing because winter told you that survival meant proving your worth. Maybe you became the peacemaker because summer taught you that love must always feel warm. Or maybe you became deeply reflective and detached because autumn whispered that being different was the only way to stay safe. Whatever season you entered the world through, it planted a seed. And that seed didn't just grow into your strengths, it also buried your most tender truths, your unmet needs, your authentic impulses, your forgotten instincts. So let me ask you this. What if the very quality you've been criticized for, being too sensitive, too strong, too detached, was actually your deepest psychological season asking to be reclaimed? What if the month you were born into didn't just shape your identity, but also hid the exact part of you you're now trying to find? What if the part of yourself you're most afraid to admit was planted before you ever had the words to name it? You didn't choose the role you were born into. It was chosen for you. Not by fate, but by a quiet psychological script that took root the moment you arrived. The season, the emotional climate, the unconscious expectations that began shaping you before you even had a memory. And in Jungian psychology, that shaping doesn't just form your identity, it divides it. One part is what the world rewards. The other, it's buried alive. That buried part is what Jung called the shadow, and it begins earlier than you think. Have you ever wondered why you keep repeating the same emotional loop, even though you know better? Why do you attract the same kind of partner, or fall into the same arguments, or burn out in the same way? That's not a weakness. That's a patterned shadow, silently governing your life from the dark. Each birth month plants a different seed. Each one gifts a surface archetype and hides a mirror underneath. Let's begin to uncover yours. January, the innocence hidden cynic. Born in the coldest season, January souls often learn to be composed, strong, and wise too soon. They are seen as stable, dependable, even stoic. But under that surface lies a deep cynicism, a silent anger at how early they had to grow up. They long for softness, but learn to mask it in performance. Their shadow whispers, "No one will catch you if you fall." February, the mystic's secret bitterness. Often intuitive, dreamy, and emotionally attuned, those born in February are guided by inner knowing. But their sensitivity is rarely protected. Their shadow? a bitterness that life doesn't feel as magical as they hoped. They appear ethereal, but inside they resent a world that keeps disappointing their inner idealist. March, the visionary's silenced rage. March, children often carry the archetype of the dreamer, the hopeful one, but many experienced early emotional dismissal, being told they were too much or too sensitive. Their shadow is rage, not loud and explosive, but turned inward, hidden beneath kindness. They explode when no one's looking or implode in self-doubt. They never learned it was safe to be angry. April, the warrior's unseen fragility. April, souls are seen as fiery, bold, natural leaders, but often they were rewarded only when they achieved. Their shadow is deep fragility, a fear of being perceived as weak, so they overcompensate, push harder, win louder. But they break privately because they don't believe anyone can hold them through failure. May, the lover's buried emptiness. May is light, sensual, vibrant. These individuals are often seen as magnetic, emotionally available and charming. But underneath is a shadow of emotional emptiness, a haunting sense of never being deeply chosen. They are adored but rarely understood. They give affection easily, but fear they'll never be loved in the way they truly need. June, the caregiver's silenced desire. June brings the archetype of the nurturer, the harmonizer. These souls learn to make peace, smooth tension, and anticipate others' needs. But their shadow is unmet longing. They were so good at caring for others that no one noticed they were starving for love. Their deepest desire to be chosen first was tucked away so they wouldn't disrupt the peace. July, the nurturer's abandoned self. July souls are deeply emotional, protective, and family-driven. But often they were parentified, turned into the emotional caretaker for others. Their shadow is a full self they've never met. They give and give, yet feel invisible. They confuse love with sacrifice and don't know how to ask, but who's going to hold me? August, the performer's shameful fear. August brings charisma, confidence, and leadership. But inside, a shadow of deep insecurity. Their gifts were often praised, but their pain was ignored. They fear irrelevance, so they keep performing. Yet in quiet moments they ask, would anyone stay if I stopped shining? September, the analyst's hidden chaos. Known for their logic, precision, and reliability, September-born individuals often organize others' lives while secretly drowning in internal disorder. Their shadow is suppressed chaos, a fear that if they ever stopped controlling, their whole identity would unravel. October, the diplomat's forbidden truth. October, souls are charming, fair, and often the bridge between opposites, but they were conditioned not to rock the boat. Their shadow is brutal truth, their real opinions, their raw instincts, their suppressed anger. They've become so good at keeping the peace that they've forgotten the power of their own fire. November, the alchemist's repressed tenderness. Often seen as intense, mysterious, and emotionally deep, November souls are wired for transformation. But beneath the depth lies a shadow of vulnerability they won't let anyone see. They've been betrayed, so they keep others out. They crave closeness, yet they're terrified of being seen without their armor. December, the sage's disowned wounds. December brings wisdom, resilience, and a larger-than-life presence. But their shadow is emotional fatigue. They often become the strong one, the wise guide for others. Yet underneath, unprocessed pain, unresolved grief, wounds they've minimized for the sake of perspective. Here's the truth. You didn't create your shadow. It was assigned, formed by the emotional landscape you were born into. Your shadow was the part of you that had to go silent so the rest of you could survive. And now, that part is trying to speak, through burnout, through frustration, through the ache that nothing ever feels quite enough. So ask yourself this: which of these shadows lives in you, and what might change if you stopped hiding it? Have you ever felt exhausted, not from what life demands of you, but from constantly pretending to be someone you're not? There is a deeper fatigue that comes not from work or age, but from the inner war we wage against our own soul. Many of us spend decades trying to be agreeable when we're really angry, or we try to be strong when all we ever needed was to be held. This quiet rebellion against our true nature is not accidental. It's the residue of a shadow we were never taught to embrace. But what if the fight was never necessary? What if the version of you that keeps trying to fix yourself is actually just another mask? In Jungian psychology, the shadow isn't a flaw to be erased. It's a lost part of you waiting to come home. Integration does not mean becoming perfect. It means becoming whole, and wholeness requires honesty. It begins in that one moment when you stop judging the part of you that feels too needy, too intense, too wild, too sensitive. That moment when, instead of pushing it down, you simply ask, "What are you trying to show me?" Real-life healing begins with small, life-affirming choices. A man who has spent years overworking to bury his fear of failure suddenly begins to paint again, something he loved as a child but abandoned for success. A woman who has always played the caretaker begins setting boundaries, and for the first time, her laughter doesn't sound strained. A mother who has hidden her sensitivity her whole life allows herself to cry in front of her daughter, and in doing so, passes down emotional permission instead of emotional perfection. These aren't just changes in behavior, they are reunions with the self. Carl Jung taught that the path to individuation, the process of becoming your true self, requires a descent into the unconscious. But you don't have to meditate in a forest or study symbols in a cave. You can begin today by noticing your emotional overreactions and asking, "What is my shadow afraid of right now?" You can write down the 3 traits you hide most from others. Are you secretly resentful, insecure, fiercely ambitious? These aren't flaws. They are keys. They lead you back to what your archetype buried to survive. Another tool is active imagination. Close your eyes. Invite the part of yourself you've long rejected, maybe the wild girl, the angry boy, the silent dreamer, and ask them what they need. You might be surprised by what answers arise when you dare to listen. You are not here to wage war on yourself. You are here to remember who you were before the world told you what was acceptable. So the real question becomes, what would your life look like if you stopped resisting your own design? What happens when you stop trimming your personality to fit into other people's boxes and start living from the blueprint you were born with? The moment you stop fighting yourself is the moment the healing begins. And that healing doesn't just change you. It magnetizes a life that was always waiting for the real you to show up. What if the peace you've been chasing was never in a destination, but in the parts of yourself you were taught to abandon? Most people don't realize how much energy they waste pretending to be okay. We over-explain our boundaries. We hide our sadness behind smiles. We push down our anger until it leaks out in silence or sarcasm. But the truth is, these subtle behaviors are not personality quirks. They are symptoms of fragmentation. We're not broken, we're just scattered. And the moment you start to call your shadow home, something miraculous begins to happen. Your life starts to feel like it finally belongs to you. In everyday reality, this transformation can look like the anxiety you once felt in social situations, softening into calm self-possession. It shows up in conversations where you no longer need to apologize for taking up space. A man who once avoided intimacy because of hidden shame now finds himself speaking openly in relationships without fear of being misunderstood. A woman who used to people-please her way through life starts saying no with a quiet power that surprises even her. These aren't dramatic overnight changes. They're sacred shifts that happen when fear is replaced by inner alignment. Carl Jung believed that integration of the shadow doesn't make you invincible, it makes you whole, and wholeness is far more powerful than perfection. When you no longer reject your own emotions, you stop trying to control other people's reactions. When you stop needing to be the good one, strong one, or easy one, you start becoming the real one. And the real you doesn't just survive life, they begin to shape it. You'll notice your emotional triggers don't pull you under like they used to. Old wounds still whisper, but they no longer command. You stop confusing love with self-abandonment. You speak slower, breathe deeper, and start trusting your inner response more than others' opinions. This is when life stops being something you manage and starts being something you meet, with open eyes, clear instincts, and a soul no longer at war. So ask yourself, what would change if you no longer feared your own emotional depth? Who would you become if you embraced your flaws as sacred signatures instead of evidence that you're unworthy? When your shadow comes home, you don't become someone else. You become fully, finally you. And for many, that's the most breathtaking homecoming of all. There comes a moment, not in youth, but somewhere in the quiet ache of midlife, when you stop asking, "What do I need to fix?" and begin asking, "What have I been hiding from myself?" That moment is your awakening. Not the loud, dramatic kind that breaks the world apart, but the soft, sacred kind that lets you finally return to it as your whole self. And maybe, just maybe, this is the moment you've been unconsciously delaying your entire life. Because you were never meant to live a half-life, you were never meant to perform your way through existence, shrinking your instincts to fit someone else's story. Yet, somewhere along the way, like so many of us, you traded aliveness for safety. You tried to fit into the birth script handed to you, be it Capricorn's discipline, Scorpio's depth, or Leo's fire, without realizing those archetypes weren't cages. They were clues. They pointed not to who you had to be, but to the part of you most desperate to be remembered. Carl Jung said, "We meet ourselves time and again in 1,000 disguises on the path of life." Your birth month wasn't a limit, it was a mirror. And when you finally begin to read its symbols not as labels but as invitations, you reclaim the very energy that was never lost, only suppressed. You stop postponing your real life in favor of roles that exhaust you. You stop waiting for permission to be seen. You stop searching for signs, because the sign has always been you. So look again at your own story. What month were you born in? What qualities were stamped onto you by others? And which ones have you quietly carried, waiting for someone to notice? This isn't just self-discovery, it's soul recovery. The traits you were mocked for, the dreams you abandoned, the truths you whispered to no one. All of it is waiting to rise. Leave your birth month and archetype in the comments. Reflect on what you've been afraid to embody. And if this touched something in you, subscribe. Because this is just the beginning of a life where your past isn't your prison. It's your prophecy. And the self you've postponed is finally ready to arrive. If this touched something sacred inside you, don't let it fade into silence. Like this video, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Your presence here is not just support, it's resonance. And if you feel moved to give back, your donation becomes a quiet but powerful gesture that helps keep this light alive for others still walking in the dark.